Hi, I'm Talia Baroncelli, and you're watching theAnalysis-news. This is part 2 of my discussion with member of Knesset, Ofer Cassif. We'll be discussing the class elements which prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state and the end of the occupation. If you'd like to support us, you can go to our website, theAnalysis.news, hit the donate button at the top right corner of the screen, and get onto our mailing list. That way you'll get all of our content straight to your inbox. See you in a bit with Ofer Cassif. Very excited to be joined by member of Knesset, Ofer Cassif. He is a member of the Hadash-Tal party, which is a left-wing coalition comprised of both Jewish and Arab Israeli citizens. And Hadash is also a movement founded along the lines of communism, inspired by communism. So the party or the coalition also calls for equality for all people living in Israel and Palestine and has called for an end to the occupation. So thank you so much for joining us again today, Ofer.
My pleasure. Thank you.
To use this class analysis that you're talking about, can you apply it to what was previously called the normalization and the Abraham Accords? Because it seems like it was that impetus to have arms agreements between Israel and other countries such as Saudi Arabia, and to have that replace a solution in which Palestinians would be able to have self-determination. Seems like those financial and military interests replaced, any sort of real attempt to have a regional solution. So how do you apply that class analysis to the Abraham Accords, which I think is in a way still U.S. policy? There has been no change there. They still want those accords to go ahead, even if or when this war in Gaza comes to an end.
You're absolutely right, because the Abraham Accords, serve the very same interest of the minority in power, especially the economic power that I mentioned before, and that goes back to the class issue. It just, proves my case. But I'm happy that you and thankful for for asking this question, because we, Hadash-Tal in the Knesset, we were the only faction that voted against the Abraham Accords in the Knesset, and we were accused as if we were against peace, but it's proved that we were totally right. When we voted against the Abraham Accords, it was not because we are against peace. It's exactly the opposite. We are for peace. But we said, and you can see that we were totally right. We said that without Palestinian liberation, without a just solution for the Palestinian people, and that means statehood eventually, there won't be any peace. You cannot skip the Palestinians. You cannot ignore the Palestinians. The Abraham Accords did exactly that. They tried to ignore. They actually ignored the Palestinians. And to that, the unholy trinity I mentioned before were all, part of it. And by ignoring the Palestinians. And we said, that will not deliver neither peace, nor security, nor stability to the region, because it ignores the core of the evil that exists there, and the core of the ongoing hostility that exists in the area. We were right. To some extent, the terrible massacre of October 7th, in which I lost friends dear to me, it was to some extent the consequence of the Abraham Accords because of the overlook of the Palestinians. This is absolutely, I want to be very clear, this is absolutely not to justify one bit this criminal massacre committed by Hamas, not at all, but in order to understand and to explain that there's no way to achieve stability, peace, security, let alone justice, without solving the core and issue and question and the main evil and unjust situation of the Palestinian people. And this is exactly going back to your question, to be more clear. This is the class issue I was talking about. Why those regimes ignore the Palestinians in order to get to the Abraham Accords? Because it served their own political and economic interests. This is a class issue, an economic issue. Yet again, they will not deliver anything. They cannot supply the good. Only Palestinian liberation can do that.
But what is the solution? Because you listen to U.S. officials, Matt Miller, for example, always talking about a ceasefire and then eventually to the creation of a Palestinian state, to a two-state solution. But in Israel, in July, I think July 19th or so, there was a resolution that was overwhelmingly passed against the creation of a Palestinian state. So 69 or 68 members of Knesset voted against having a Palestinian state, and 9 members voted in favor. And then, there's this constant lip service on behalf of other Western officials in the name of the two-state solution. But, the West Bank keeps shrinking. There are more illegal settlements being built. You mentioned there were maybe 4 people who have been sanctioned in the West Bank or extreme Israelis who have been sanctioned on that front. But generally, the policy hasn't changed in order to actually implement international law. So how do we get to any sort of either two-state or one-state solution if the very fundamentals are not being upheld?
First of all, I have to say that when I mentioned it before in our chat, in regard to another question, but it's still relevant. One of the main reasons why the fanatic fascists control the state of Israel, why this government, that it is a full-fledged fascist government with real racist elements. People like Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, and other thugs who really believe in Jewish supremacy, a racial one that echoes something from the past, unfortunately. They could not do what they do, including this ridiculous vote against the recognition in a Palestinian state, had there was an opposition. But unfortunately, there is no real opposition in that matter, because the main 2 parties who are supposed to be the alternative to the fascist government, and those are the Benjamin Gantz party and Yair Lapid's party. Most of them either voted with the coalition against the Palestinian state, or just went out of the plenum, or abstained. So there is no real opposition. It happens because of them. I put a lot of the blame on them, because they do not fight back, either because they agree with the coalition or because they are cowards. There is a combination of the two of those. Because of that, it seems very, grim. It seems very, pessimistic, because there is no parliamentarian opposition apart from us. And we are only 5 out of 120 in the Knesset. So one thing that should change is, of course, there must be an opposition, a real opposition, a brave opposition. And that can be done only if 2 things happen. One is that more and more people take the streets and very clearly and bluntly shout out against the ongoing genocide and for a peaceful political solution that I mentioned before. That may put some pressure on the opposition, which, as I said, consists today mainly of cowards. And there must be an international pressure. A combination of internal and international pressure may and will influence not this government and the fanatics. I have no expectations from them, but it may make some pressure or influence the opposition or those parts or elements in the opposition which do not agree with the coalition but afraid to speak up. That must be done. I mean, we are doomed if we do not have international support. We are doomed. We are too small. We cannot achieve much. And unfortunately, and I tweeted it last week, and I have to say that again, and to use your platform with your permission to spread the word.
Of course.
Look, the family of my grandparents on my mother's side were the only ones who were not killed by the Nazis. I mean, because they left Poland before 39, sorry. No one survived from the families. I'm talking about dozens of, of people. Nobody survived. Everybody was killed. Partly because the world stood by. Didn't do anything. Didn't care. For me, it's horrifying that it happens again. As if we haven't learned anything. It seems that the world, especially leaders, who consider themselves as great Democrats and liberals, they don't do anything. In what sense are they different from those who didn't do anything 80 years ago and 85 years ago? In what sense? I mean, that's going to be one of the worst stamps, as it were, in human history, stamped by blood. I mean, I find it very difficult, even to describe not only my rage or pain or disappointment, but my, disgust. But this silence and overlooking.
And it's different now, too, because this time you see it. I mean, this time it's being live streamed on social media. It's not like we don't have the technology to see what's happening. It is
absolutely
happening in front of our eyes, but there's this narrative of justifying it or saying that, Israel is doing everything it can to minimize civilian harm. And, it's unfortunate that it happened. It happened.
Which is a sheer lie. It is a sheer lie. Everybody knows that. I mean, the government of Israel is interested in the bloodshed and in the massacre. The government of Israel consists of, as I said before, fascists and wars. And by the way, it's even very difficult to say those things. You know that I was suspended last year for 45 days from the Knesset for my parliamentary obligation to my public, because I dared say that the government of Israel was interested in violence, to use it as an excuse to pursue with Smotrich, by the way, the decisive plan, which I specified in our last chat, I believe, last year. And because I compared it to some other disasters that happened in the past, and you know what I mean, I was suspended from the Knesset because of that. Thereafter, just recently, there was an attempt to impeach me altogether from the Knesset simply because I signed a petition in support of South African appeal to ICJ. And they were short 4 members of the Knesset. They needed 90, they had 86 to impeach me. Now it seems that I'm going to be suspended for a few months. The decision is going to be published in the end of the month, I think. So I do not know the decision yet. There are thousands of complaints against me to the ethics committee of the Knesset, not because things that I did, but because of things that I said or did, but for political reasons, not something criminal or I don't know what. I did my duty as a human being first and foremost, but also as a member of the Knesset, of the Israeli parliament, who is obliged to specific values and to the public. So I'm apparently going to be suspended from the Knesset soon for a few months, simply because I signed this petition, and because I said that Netanyahu is an assassin, and because I used the term genocide. in regard to the ongoing things in Gaza. So that's the only democracy in the Middle East, yes? So everything is connected. We were discussing, thus far, the crimes against the Palestinians, and justly so. But also Israel, within Israel, internally, there is a process of fascism, political persecution of anyone who raises an alternative voice against the genocide, for peace. Especially Palestinian citizens are persecuted, but not only. And as I just exemplified, even members of the Knesset, with the immunity we have, are persecuted and can hardly speak. I won't be surprised if following our conversation now, there will be more charges, as it were, and complaints against me. But I must say, I will never shut up. I will never shut up. This is my obligation.
Yeah, it's your obligation. And I also wonder, I mean, you said that the opposition doesn't really exist, that there aren't that many subversive voices in Israel right now. I mean, is that because they just don't exist, or they're totally scared? Because even the general Giora Eiland, who's now retired, but he was considered to be center-left. I mean, he is obviously incredibly belligerent and anti-Palestinian in terms of the plan that he has construed for the north of Gaza. But it's interesting how figures like him, Yair Lapid, Benny Gantz, they're still considered to be somewhat more left than Netanyahu. And yet, I guess that's a reflection of how far right the Israeli political system is. If, to be considered left is to be slightly in opposition to Netanyahu's judicial reforms. Bear in mind that, before October 7th, there were all these protests against Netanyahu's proposed reforms of the Supreme Court system and the judicial reforms. Even Eiland was in support of encouraging people in the Israeli military to condemn the judicial reforms. So it seems like, these people, to a certain extent, support some aspects of Israeli democracy, but they don't support equality for everyone. So can you speak a bit more about that, division or radicalization within Israeli society?
First of all, the judicial reform is a sugar-coated term to describe a coup d'etat. Because what the government of Israel wanted to do by this so-called judicial reform is not really to reform the judicial system or anything else. It is to actually eliminate the independence of the judicial system. This is a coup because this is a change in the very essence of the regime. That is not to say that Israel was a democracy before. In my view, Israel was never a real democracy because the main basis value of modern democracy, we must emphasize, is equality. Israel was established on an anti-egalitarian platform, because once you define a state, any state, as being a state that belonged to just one portion of the population, it doesn't matter if we are talking about a specific ethnic group or a specific gender or sex or a specific class, etc. But once a state is defined or practiced, or both, as if it belonged only to one portion of the population, even if it is the majority, this is not a real democracy because it undermines the very essence of equality. In that sense, I think that Israel should better be called as an ethnocracy rather than a democracy, because democracy, the demos, as it is called in Greek, refers to the whole citizenry. An ethnos, is the term that refers to a specific ethnic group within a specific society. So Israel, in that sense, was always an ethnocracy and not a democracy. But now, there is a joke I made, forgive me for flattering myself, that the current government of Israel is the most egalitarian ever because it is going to suppress not only Arabs, but Jews also. So in that sense, it's the most egalitarian government because it treats everybody the same in the sense of oppressing everybody. Of course, this is a joke because not only because this is not a real equality, but because still it oppresses the Palestinians more, including the Palestinians who are citizens in Israel. But the situation now in Israel, the political persecution is to an extent that never existed before. You know what? Even not under the military rule that the Palestinian citizens in Israel were under from 48 to 66. I don't know if our listeners or viewers are aware of that, but from the very first day of the existence of the State of Israel in 1948 until 1966, to the Palestinian citizens in Israel, it was obviously before the occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza Strip, the Palestinian citizens in Israel were under a military rule, and which very, profoundly restrict their movement, their freedom of speech, etc., etc. It was removed only in 1966, and then 1967 there was the occupation. That is to say, by the way, that Israel is under a military rule to some extent throughout its existence, apart from 1 year.
Wow. Yeah, and now the people who are, the Palestinians who are occupied in the West Bank and Gaza are also subjected to military and not to civilian.
That's what I meant, since 1967, right. Of course. So in that sense, it was never really a democracy. But now, as I began to say, the level of oppression is even worse than was under the military rule before 66. Because now there is a political persecution of any alternative voice, beginning with members of the Knesset, like the example I gave for myself, that we can hardly use such terms which describe the truth. I'll give you more examples if you like later. As to myself in the Knesset and the way that my freedom of speech is restricted, like more than even my friends, specifically because I'm Jewish. But this is, perhaps if you like, I'll refer to it later. But there is a persecution of citizens in Israel, let alone Palestinians under occupation. That goes without saying. But within Israel, there is a persecution that was never there. I'll give you a few examples. Just last week, a teacher, a woman, a Palestinian woman, teacher, published in TikTok a dance. She was dancing. And the TikTok, automatically published the date. It was 7th of October. She was immediately arrested, chained, with blindfolded, eyes, as if she danced because she celebrated the massacre of October 7th, which was a total lie, and she was released quite rapidly. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. There are thousands of examples, even worse. And it goes first and foremost for Palestinian citizens, but also for democratic Jews. I have a good friend, a teacher, a Jewish teacher, very acclaimed one, and very, almost a veteran. He's been teaching for more than 40 years, I think. And he published last year, I think it was just after the massacre of October, he published names and ages of children in Gaza who were killed by Israel. Nothing more than that, published on Facebook, posted. Because in Israel, the Palestinians normally have no names or ages. They are not just numbers, if they exist at all. So he was fired from the school he was teaching in. The municipality of the city where he was teaching forbade him from teaching in the city as a whole. The Board of Education, within 2 days, revoked his license to teach. When he was arrested for 4 days, accused in treason. Obviously, after 4 days, when he was brought in front of a judge, he was immediately released. He sued the municipality, the Board of Education, he won. And those two examples are out of thousands. There is a political persecution and silencing of anyone who raises an alternative voice to the genocide, the massacre, and the crimes. And that goes on.
And what's so crazy is the footage of him. I think there was footage of some of his students when he went back to the school, and they were shouting threats at him against this particular teacher, saying that, we hope that you die, and horrible things. It seems like some of his students weren't even supporting.
Absolutely. But as I said, this is only the tip of the iceberg. And as to myself, if I may say, if it's okay with you, my suspension and attempt to impeach me and the persecution in general of any member of the Knesset with the immunity and everything, we are restricted, my comrades and I, at the Knesset. We are restricted. We can hardly speak. A few months ago, there was a huge story of soldiers in a military prison who tortured and sodomized Palestinian prisoners. And when I raised this issue in the Knesset, I was silenced by members of the opposition, by the way, as well. Members of Yesh Atid, the so-called alternative to the government, the Yair Lapid's party, submitted complaints against me to the committee of ethics, the ethics committee of the Knesset, because I raised the true story of this terrible thing that happened in the military prison. When again, this is only the tip of the iceberg.
In the Negev, this was at the State Time Detention Center, and there was footage of
State Time in the Negev. Yes, absolutely. And there were so many.
Right, there was footage of Israeli soldiers sodomizing Palestinian detainees, and then there was a whole debate in Parliament and also on various media channels, in essence justifying.
I was not even allowed to raise it in the Knesset. I was attacked by part of the opposition as well, simply for raising that. I was accused in lying, and we all know that was the truth. And by the way, if we mentioned this issue of Sde Teiman, of this, concentration camp of prisoners or Palestinian detainees, but there is another issue, which is a great part of the persecution, and this is the violence of the police. There is no Israeli police anymore. There is a militia of Ben-Gvirs. Because the police...
Right, because Ben-Gvir is the Minister of National Security, and so he's militarized the police.
He militarized and you may say fascized the police. The Israeli police, still called Israeli police, still has the same uniforms, but it's been acting as a private militia of the minister and the government in general. It's been violent towards demonstrators, including families of the hostages. Families of the hostages have been systematically beaten and arrested by that militia called Israeli police. And there are some other armed militias, extreme rightist militias, which are only waiting for the D-Day to shoot us. I'm saying that explicitly. That day is beyond the corner. They are just waiting in order. And by the way, the very same police that was summoned by soldiers a few months ago refrained from coming. What am I talking about? I'm talking about after the Sde Teiman issue. Those soldiers who sodomized and were supposed to be investigated. When the military police came to the bases in order to arrest and to investigate those suspects in sodomizing a Palestinian detainee, so soldiers did not allow them to enter. sorry, not soldiers, people do not allow them to enter. And soldiers, yes, soldiers, attack them brutally, physically. Some thugs penetrated into these bases and later on into another base where a military court exists and attacked soldiers who were supposed to investigate the suspects or didn't allow those thugs to enter. And the soldiers had to call the police in order to protect them. The police didn't come because the secretary of Ben-Gvir ordered them not to go. So on the one hand, the police has been terribly brutal and violent against demonstrators for democracy and against the genocide, including families of the hostages. At the same time, the same police continuously refrains from stopping violence of settlers or of thugs who penetrated into Israeli military bases. That's the situation. That's how fascism looks like.
Right, because you also had, I think her name was Tali Gottlieb, the very extreme right politician who was, I think she was also maybe at Stetheiman or one of the other detention centers in support of not having this investigation.
Not only her. There were a few members of the Knesset and a minister or two as well. There's no law in Israel. Not anymore.
This points to how much of a class issue it actually is, and that you, in order to understand the way that the occupation and inequalities are entrenched, you need to look at these class elements to understand how it keeps reproducing itself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, Ofer Cassif, it's been great speaking to you. I think next time maybe we could speak about your philosophical inspirations and interests, because I know in the past you did mention how you come from this Jewish intellectual tradition of subversion, and that has always been the case, Jewish thinkers being in opposition to the mainstream and in opposition to inequality and fighting for justice. So maybe next time we could have more of a philosophical discussion of these various texts.
Gladly.
That would be really interesting.
Gladly. Thank you.
And thank you for watching theAnalysis.news. We really appreciate all of your continued support. See you next time.